Namaste. Good afternoon and welcome to number 33 of 33 of my short videos. And we'll see where I go from here, but for now, this is going to wrap it up. And I saved the best for last. I wanted to talk about my one and only teacher. When I say teacher, I mean one that was fortunate enough to sit in his presence. Prior to that, I had Paramahamsa Yogananda, who was exposed at somewhere between 12 and 14 years old in his autobiography of a yogi from my mom's bookshelf. So Paramahamsa, you were really my first guru, even though you died when I was only 4 years old. Your Self-Realization Fellowship, while I never joined, I've been to your retreat in Malibu, and it was really special. Got some things in the gift shop, obligatory, huh? Took a nice walk around the premises, around the lake. Incredible. Went into your special little, kind of very churchish, but what was said up front was your personal little retreat. Meditation retreat, and so I did feel your presence there. So once again, thank you. And I did study Rinzai Zen for a long time, 33 years in fact. My first introduction, I had a Roshi, but I was aware of Zen, but not really aware of the traditions, and I just happened to, well, nothing's a happenstance, right? I ended up in a Rinzai Zen. Retreat in Hawaii, in Kalihi Valley of all places. And if you know Oahu, Kalihi Valley is not the place you'd expect, but there is a beautiful, peaceful property there. And I learned the proper sitting. I wore a gi, a white gi with no belt, with a white belt, because we didn't demark our, some of the highlights of that place was, number one, they didn't cloister. Number two, they practiced kind of in the samurai Bushido code. We had some introduction to clay work. We had some introduction into Chadao, the tea ceremony. Some introduction to Ikebana, flower arranging. And then a martial art, which mine I've talked about before, was quite unique. My martial art was Zen walking. And I've done videos on that. So, but today is a little bit different, because what I'm aiming towards is to show you the path to my teacher, my only teacher in the sense that I could sit in his physical presence. I'll share some of the ironies of that once it did happen. But let it be said that at the time I first encountered him, I was still steeped heavily in the Rinzai Zen tradition, and he just happened to come from the Chan, the first Chinese patriarch, and the 28th Indian patriarch, Bodhidharma, came from India / Nepal into southern China and introduced his teachings, which were to become the foundation of Chan, which was to go on and have 6 patriarchs, and Hui Ning, the 6th patriarch, the Platform Sutra, became a particular favorite of mine. But my teacher was steeped in this Chan, and my Chinese is terrible, so I don't have the right tone. but there's a lot of people out there that can correct me. And they talk, primarily they talk about non-verbal transmission. And I'll get into that more. But let's begin. Teaching at university in Geelong, Taiwan, right along the coast, Taiwan National Ocean University. And it's pretty appropriate because I came there already with the Chinese Haiyang, and my university was named Haiyang Dashui. So Haiyang came to Haiyang. Pretty interesting. And I've been there for a couple of years and had a place. I always liked to live away from everybody else, but I lived in a little fishing village, which was really a unique experience. Only foreigner for miles away, kind of a novelty. And I was always isolated in the sense that protected, isolated by choice, because I didn't want to learn Chinese, and that's a whole nother. I learned to listen, and was conversant enough to take care of my needs, but I didn't want people to talk to me. I wanted to be isolated, and you can't be much more isolated to be in a foreign culture for many years without the language. In fact, as I sit looking at you, it's been 25 years here where I've learned. I bet I don't know 25 words in Chinese, and I'm not bragging. I'm just telling you, this is what it is. So I'm still assured that anonymity. Lots of eyes on me, but I always conducted myself in a gentlemanly way and was able to, while not relish the attention, at least deal with it. But anyway, in December, about late December 2011, I had gotten a very bad flu. Very bad flu. And I never want to be one for the doctor, even though they have the tremendous national health care here. One of my students, bless her heart, insisted that I go to the doctor because I was quite ill. And when I got to the doctor in the emergency room, most often interns come there, and the intern was quite anxious to practice his English, and essentially what he did is over-medicated me. I know I had some codeine cough syrup and lots of pills, and they love their pills, they love their medicines here. And anyway, 2 or 3 days later, starting to feel somewhat better. I remember being in my bed, and was winter, and winter's not cold by cold standards, but it's still probably was 15 or 16 degrees centigrade. 60, it's 55 to 60 Fahrenheit. Approximately, I'm guessing on all that, but it's not very important. And all of a sudden, I felt called to battle, for the lack of a better word. Just wearing my swim shorts. It was dusk, just before dusk. An hour of light still left. And I found myself charging, like I said, battle, preparing for battle, charging out of my house for no apparent reason at that time when I come out. But as I went on my small alleyway and I looked down the street, I saw a fierce, three-headed dog. And it had a chain, but the chain led up to, I don't know who was controlling. Chain led up to nowhere. The chain just went up and then disappeared. So I saw no hand. I thought no control. So nobody who was chained, but I don't know who was controlling this three-headed dog. It was fierce. It was up to my mid chest. It was still quite a distance away. It had three heads with the most intense fire red eyes. This was evil, the epitome of evil. And later I was to learn, of course I heard of this. This was Cerberus, and from Greek mythology. And it was often referred to as the Hound of Hades. It's a three-headed dog that guards the gate of the underworld to prevent the dead from leaving. He was the offspring of a couple of monsters. It's interesting. Echidna and Typhoon. And had a serpent for a tail and snakes protruding from multiple parts of the body. So envision this. So chest high, three-headed, black dog with a heavy-duty chain leading up to who knows where, with a serpent tail and snakes protruding from parts of the body, and a big mouth drool coming down. Anyway, I looked at this three-headed dog and I did the inexplicable. I charged this beast, fearlessly I might add, in my swim shorts. I charged him. Three heads and all, evil red penetrating eyes and all. The Hound of Hades, the Hound of Hell. And I don't know my motivation, except that I was impelled to charge this beast. Maybe in the hopes of protecting others, or at least, I don't know. My battle with evil, I guess, is, if you want to look at it metaphorically. Maybe it was representing the evil that was yet in me that I wanted to put to rest. Because I'd been, since the age of 6, on a spiritual path, and since the age of actively meditating since 12 or 14, when I read Paramahansa's book, meditating my whole life, without ever joining a group. I checked out things, I read things, but I was never attracted. I was never a joiner. Always a spiritual practitioner on its own, on my own. But I started wrestling with this beast. I mean, grabbing it by the neck and twisting and avoiding the other 2 mouths and yelling, apparently, yelling quite loudly at the beast, roaring my roar. Maybe my roar of righteousness, I don't know. But if you, and I ended up squeezing the beast by his neck, which was like this, with the 3 heads snapping at me, and defeated the beast in that poof. Just as he appeared, he was gone. Black of the most midnight black darkness. And I remember a puff of smoke. But then I found myself on the asphalt. and scratched and scraped. If you can imagine, I was wrestling him on the ground, on the asphalt, in my swim shorts, with no shirt, no shoes. And meanwhile, every neighbor in my narrow alleyway, everybody was terrified to come out, but they were all peeking. I could see eyes in every single house. And I picked myself up, bleeding and scratched and scraping and scraped, and went in the house. Well, fortunately, as always, my landlord lived a long block away, and the word seeped down. Everybody knew. Narrow, 20-foot narrow, with houses all the way. Anyway, he came down, which was the first. He didn't speak any English, but he came down and he offered me a cup of warm water. And he just kind of awkwardly stood. And shortly thereafter, my Taiwan mom and dad, people that had adopted me and cared for me, that ironically were both younger than me, who always took care of me, showed up. And they just looked at me, and they know me really well. And I mean, I'm their son, and it had been years. Our relationship had already been 4 or 5 years at that point, where they literally helped me find houses. They took care of me, just as you would a child, even though I was, I don't even want to do the math, but pretty old child. And recently they had found a teacher. They had found their teacher. And they had tried to recruit me to go and join their group and to participate. And I would just say, oh, no, thank you. And once in a while they come by with their purple, they all wear purple shirts with the name of their Chan group on the front. Beautiful purple color. And everybody apparently had to wear this purple color. Their uniform. And they would talk to me about how much it's meant to them, and I always said, hey, good for you, I'm on my own path, and I'm glad you found somebody. But they were really quiet individuals. My dad didn't speak English. My mom had graduated from a university and was pretty good, very good in English. So they spoke for a minute and they sat with me quietly, not too close. They didn't try to touch me. They just left me alone, sitting there, because my landlord had told them that I must be drunk to behave. That's what everybody thought, that I got drunk and behaved like a drunkard. Because apparently before I got out and wrestled, I was sitting in the front of my car, parked in front of my house, and jumped out of the car to go fight Cerberus. But anyway, I didn't drink, and they knew that. They sat quietly with me, let me enjoy the hot water. I remember having my hands in my head and just kind of sheepishly looking up. So I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. Of course, I didn't drink, and I didn't even bother trying to explain because I was still processing it. And I never shared that with really anybody. I just said, well, I was battling some demons. And it seemed like I won, but I didn't look like a victor, Asphalt scrapes, like I fell off a motorcycle on the asphalt road. It's what I look like. Scrapes and scratches and bleeding. Bleeding a little bit from the mouth because I apparently hit my face. But anyway, they sat with me for maybe half an hour, and then Mom, in her quiet way, just looked at me, and she was the quietest. She says, you know, maybe it's time that you came to see Sifu, came to see our Sifu. And I thought, yeah, maybe it is. Everything is a sign for something, so this is what I said, sure. But it turned out to be a pretty convoluted process. At that time, he must have had, this was Myo-chan Sifu. And he had a purple group, and they were pretty well known. At this time, he must have had at least 50 or 60,000 active followers, and he would go around the island teach and having meditation classes in different centers. But his Taipei center would have as many as some 2,000 or 4,000 people all sitting, bowing. Kaan Shifu, Santan Shifu. To this immaculately dressed, older, well, I say older, probably my age, Chinese guy with the traditional Chinese shirt, thin as a rail, but immaculate. Jet black hair, obviously dyed, but perfectly. It was always perfect. The way he presented, he was quite a dandy, I guess is a way of putting it. He took real pride in, he was really meticulous about his presentation. Thin, he looked great. He wore something like this, but his was precious jade. He wore something like these, but they were also precious jade. And I wear them more or less to honor. And, you know, I've got tiger eye, and I've got coral, and I've got something. I've got a little turtle here that I love. You can't see him, but turtles are sacred to me. But I don't know what this is. My wife made these. My wife is into the stones, and they're not precious, but some of them are semi-precious. And they're precious to me, let me put it that way. But this is my homage to my teacher. Okay. And I do try to, I have my own style. I do try to, I'm this definitely like a dandy, but I try to be neat and tidy and hygienic and, you know. So at that time, there was a process to get to be able to sit, to be able, before you could go to the hall, you know, you had to get your purple shirt because everybody wore the purple. You weren't allowed in without your purple t-shirt. So of course, when you came through the neighborhood to go to the meditation hall, you're quite noticeable. Everybody goes, "Oh, those purple people," and I ended up calling them the purple, for lack of a better term. And there was an elaborate sign. They really were organized, and people practiced seva, and there was representative on every crosswalk, so they heard you safely. They lined you up, and you wove, and you stood. You didn't. His sole objective was not to trouble the neighborhood, trouble the people that were living there. So we were up against the wall, carefully herded. I remember feeling like a sheep and always going, bah, bah. Like I had to go here and here and here and there. And I never liked to be controlled, and I've never, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I wanted to get to this place because I wanted to see this man. I said, let me see him for myself. Just give me a glimpse. Let me put me in the back row of farce, and I'll know immediately if there's any connection, if he gets a teacher for me or not. I'll know immediately. Well, there was no foreigners in this group at that time, and they had no process for a Chinese speaker. You'd go to a hall and you'd sit for 5 minutes, meditate, and then they would drone on for what seemed like hours in Chinese. And I went to one of those and sat for 5 minutes and listened for 2 hours of was nonsense to me because I didn't speak Chinese and understand. And I've come to find out that even the native speakers had trouble with the language of Buddhism, even as their mother tongue. They didn't know what's going on either. And I did it once, and this was an ordeal. Sit down uncomfortably on the floor. They had a little cushion to sit on. Wasn't accustomed to doing that. And what you have to do is you go to a series of these. I think you got to go 4, 5, 6, 7. They had a process anyway. For Chinese, but for foreigners, they didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to do with me. So I had enough. Low threshold for useless activity, as I saw it, you know. And again, just told my mom, I said, hey, just let me, sneak me in the back of the hall. Put me up there, because they had the university at the time was an arena with tiers, and there was the nosebleed row. I said, put me up in the nosebleed row. I don't care. I don't need to be close to him, but I will know if there's any value, if he's a teacher, if he's relevant for me. And my mom went, bless her heart, went to speak to somebody. Her teacher who went to her, they were very hierarchical. They had a high, someone just below the man, just below Sifu, and that was branched down the hierarchy of ever lower teachers. And I mean, lower in the hierarchical sense. More powerful ones that were closest to him, and then just kind of big giant pyramid. And their teacher was somewhere in the first tier somewhere. So their teacher went to someone and spoke to them and said, we have a foreigner, we don't know what to do with him. He's been studying Zen for the last 30-something years. He's always been spiritually inclined and been practicing, and he's meditated for many, many years. So they granted me the present of the number 2 at that time. She was number 2 in the hierarchy. She'd been with the teacher for 20 years since he started sometime. This was 2012 by now. February of 2012 when I got to this point. I think, or January of 2012. Anyway, they brought me in this little room, much bigger than this room that I'm in now. And Yenny sat in front, and the minions were around. My parents had to translate to her. And essentially, she asked me one question, and I remember it well. By the time it got translated to me, the question was, what is Zen? How do you define Zen? And the answer, I'd never thought of it before, because I've been studying. I could have given a 2 or 3 hour speech about Zen. At that point, I was that well steeped in Zazen, the Japanese style of sitting. But the words just came out like I'm gifted with magic words. The words came out. They were very simple words, and I just said, the fastest way home. And so I said, and she got up like a gun, like shot from a cannon. She got up so fast and ran to a nearby door where, unbeknownst to me, the teacher was in right there. Mio-chan, Sifu, was right there. And it wasn't but 2 minutes this man walked in. And I was almost as close to him as I am to this camera. Couldn't touch him, but very close. And he sat down in front of me. And we started giggling. We started just laughing. And everyone in the room was aghast because he had Sifu had a stern countenance. He was always very stern, very, very few words, and stern. And you had to be reverent and bow, and people actually prostrated themselves on the ground in front of him. I mean, this is for them, this was their God. You know, he was God for them. Buddha, 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 you know. And for me, he was like a buddy, a friend. And it seemed like, you know, it seemed like we had been childhood friends. I don't know. But we continued to laugh and to giggle. And I was very calm and very relaxed, and everybody else is rigid like toy soldiers, you know. No expression, just wondering what were they witnessing. And this elegant, I can still remember the tea girl coming in, Patience. She was so elegant. She came in the room so unobtrusively. She brought him a cup of tea, and this was her job. This was her seva. This is what her activity was. She'd been chosen probably from her demeanor and her grace. And when she put a cup of tea down, and he started drinking the tea, and then he would look to. They sent out for another teacher had lived in America and thought was better versed in English to translate with me. They were Taiwanese, but they had traveled. They were educated. They were sophisticated. They were world aware. They were aware of the outside. Worldly is the word I'm looking for. And came in and acted as an intermediary. And he had a few questions about me, had a few questions about my practice, very, very few. And then he asked, through his intermediary, if I had any questions. And it's really ironic because up until that very moment, I'd been the man of 1,000 questions. I had questions and questions and questions. My whole practice was about questions. I always had questions. Yet I looked in this man's eyes and I said to him again spontaneously, I have absolutely no questions. And I did the little why and in Thailand, the Y, which I'd been to many times, and just kind of bowed to him. And again, he smiled. And it was minutes before he had to leave because this was in between classes. So he bowed and left the room. And meanwhile, everybody was scrambling. I don't know what was going on. I just kind of sat there. And next thing I knew, I was handed a shirt, and, purple shirt. And I was a big boy then, kind of fatty. And my shirt was too tight. And I remember trying to stretch it over my belly. And before I know it, I was hustled out into this small room open to this huge meditation room. And I was placed front row center, which I was to learn is the place of honor, the closer. He's up elevated on a stage. And he had a small group of usually younger people that were kind of bodyguards or kind of, but not really bodyguards, just they got to sit, they were privileged. They were privileged anyway. They sat on the stage. And again, it was mostly young, like university age people, and they were very devout. And I sat in the front row, and on both sides of me, they had strategically placed two people that could speak English. And in those days, Sifu would tend to talk a little bit, and they were trying to translate for me. They felt obligated to translate for me. And I just kind of remember patting both their knees because we're sitting pretty close. It's really tight quarters to get everybody in. So I'm not in my comfort zone. They're closer to me than I would have liked them to be because of limited space. But I just looked at both of them and said, you guys, this is your opportunity. You appreciate, but I don't really need to know what he's saying. I'm just feeling it. So you guys go on about, please go on about your practice. Don't feel obligated. Because I didn't learn Chinese, I didn't feel that it was within my purview, within my rights, to ask people to translate for me. I'd rather just not know than impose on people, because it was my conscious choice not to learn Chinese. And it sounds unjustifiable, and I don't justify it, but I can explain it. But this is not the time or the place. So after the class, people filtered away, and Sifu came down to where I was. And he came very close, and he put his hand on my forehead. I remember he touched me here. He also put his hand on my heart, touched me there. And this was a really unique experience in my life, because when he touched me here, I was immediately in what I've come to call Buddha Hall. Tens and thousands of Buddhas. All colors, all kind of, you talk about, gender. I don't know, male, female, whatever in between. Some were more human form than others, but just colorful. And it was huge. There was tens and thousands of Buddhas in Buddha Hall. Golden light, gold everywhere with light shining, and royal blues and deep purples. And I just remember I was witnessing that, and I was actually welcomed into the hall. I was welcomed as a Buddha. First time I was called a Buddha. Welcome, my Buddha brother, some of them said. And I was just in awe, and there was the Tibetan singing bowls, and just chanting, if this was heaven for me, anyway. Certainly was my vision of heaven. I stayed there for a long time, it seemed to me. And meanwhile, he stood with me for quite a long time, touching this was the visual, and then the heart, touching the heart. I just felt flooding, just like information. And this is when I learned about inching, heart to heart. This was his real method of transmission. It was never verbal. It was intuitive. It was heart to heart. And this was my initiation to his group. And from the very beginning, I was a stubborn old man. Never liked rules. I always had I would do anything for anybody if I was only asked. But told to do anything, I absolutely would never do it. And I was a kind of a non-confrontational resistor. Tell me something, I might nod, I might shake my head and never do it. But never verbalize and never protest and never, just don't do it. And it would take people a long time, because I received my instructions seemingly so readily. But might as well have been talking to a stone, because I wasn't going to do. Never would. Was a rebel without a cause, as it turns out, and paid a dear price. But I'm 60. 60-year-old man close to it at this time. And I am who I am. And this group had rules and the hierarchy and this teacher and that teacher. And first of all, I didn't get put in any group because there was no one. What are they going to do with me? If I went to a group, it was all Chinese. So from the very beginning, I was kind of unique. And Sifu looked down for me from the very beginning. He says, leave Hai Yang alone. They used my Chinese name, which meant ocean, which was already my name. And he said, leave Hai Yang alone. Don't bother him. And this continued all through my 4 or 5 years with him of weekly meditations. And 8 or 10 times when I was fortunate enough to be in his presence, and they always were. He had a minder. There was always a translator, and we switched translator. We got one that was really a kindred soul. Sylvia, I love you. The tea girl, Yanni, his number 2. So I had the mender, number 2. Sometimes Shimu, his wife. But there was always at least 5 people when we were together alone in the room. And again, we would just sit and laugh. Basically, we would laugh. And I remember he'd tell me a few things. He'd say, you're not all the way yet, but you're a bodhisattva. You're the next level from fully awakened, and you will awaken. Your time will come. And you're going to have to choose. I can already see that. He told me that I had already chosen on some level, that I was willing, I could escape the wheel of samsara, the wheel of reincarnation, the wheel of birth in this lifetime, but I would already volunteer to come back to help all sentient beings awaken from their slumber, to recognize the universal oneness of us all. He'd already prepared me for that. And then he looked at me one day and he says, I love you because you have innocence, because you're innocent and pure. This is what he told me. He asked my translator, how did you become 60, almost 60, and maintain this childlike innocence, this childlike purity? How did you keep the child alive in you? And I said, I am that child, Sifu. I am that child. I've always been that child. And at the end of every meeting, he would always bless me, and I would do I learned the rituals to honor him. And he would always ask me the same thing, do you have any questions? And I would say, no, Sifu, I no longer have any questions. And he would smile and move on to his next. He was a busy man. At this time, he had gotten to 100,000, 120,000, probably peaked out at 150,000, I would guess, followers. So you can imagine he's a busy man. But I remember the last meeting that I had with him, he looked at me and says, okay, I'm going to begin the most sacred, the highest teachings. I'm going to begin sharing with you the secrets, the highest teachings that my tradition has. And the implication was that this is the preparation that I needed to continue. And this is my second to the last meeting. Let me go back. Pardon me. And I remember waiting. At that time, I had an office at my university. I used to sit there and I'm waiting for him to call me. And I'm going to get this special teaching. I didn't share it to anybody other than the people that were around me. And of course, Bagua, this gossip would spread like wildfire. So everybody knew that I'd been chosen. Why me? Nobody knew. Why the Adoga, the foreigner, the Waigoran? Why him? They couldn't get it. They just couldn't get it. Because he hadn't offered anybody this opportunity as far as I knew. So I could pray. It took me 2 weeks of waiting. And then it dawned on me. I was sitting in front of the screen, the computer, and I felt his presence. And I didn't know. I had heard Inshing, but I didn't know. I didn't make people translate. I didn't know about heart to heart. I didn't know that his order was of this silent transmission, that there was no words for what he wanted. It was from his awareness to my awareness, and I had to be aware enough to get it. And after 2 weeks, I said, it felt like he was knocking on my shoulder or something, calling me on my cell phone. I said, Sifu. And I began the heart-to-heart transmission with the man. And then, as things would be, the next opportunity I had to be with him, he says, okay, I've taken you to the precipice. Our job, my job is over. We're done. I've taught you what I have to teach you. I've brought you to the precipice. Now, jump. And I looked into the precipice into darkness. No bottom. And he turned around. I'll never forget. He turned around and walked away. So his last words were, our time together, our journey is over. I've done what I can do. I've prepared you, and that's all I can do. You have to jump. And I remember leaping immediately, and that's a whole other story of what happened on this leap, landing on this dirty, cold sidewalk on an infant Buddha. And I've talked about that a Buddha has to mature too. I had to grow into my Buddhahood. But this is my experience with my teacher. Now, at this point, I want to talk about money, because I always believe that it was a fundamental Dharma principle. Dharma is the teachings, by the way, that gurus should never sell their knowledge, but should give it freely and unreservedly, which Sifu did. But this is the part all of us were encouraged to donate, $30 a month for the price of the cushions and the halls and all the costs. But we were all encouraged. But we were not, wasn't mandatory, but we were encouraged. And most people did. But what I didn't understand was, I said, okay, I'm giving the 30,000, but this is kind of like paying. It didn't sit really well, because I thought that this should be freely given. But who's providing the hall where I sat? And all the beautiful brothers and sisters that did their seva by showing us, just literally, can you imagine the logistics of putting 4,000 people in a room, organized and emptying the room so that shortly thereafter another group would come in, and to keep that group waiting the whole time. Anyway, the logistics were, he was a micromanager, something that I can't be and I never will be, but he was in charge of every single aspect of this as I was learned. But here's the thing about the donation. It is a fundamental Dharma principle that the student disciple should never take the knowledge for free and should donate to the support of the Guru, his other students, and his activities. Remuneration for teaching is called dakshina. And dakshina is a Sanskrit word mean any donation, fees, or honorarium given to a cause, monastery, temple, spiritual guide, or after a ritual. It may be expected or a tradition or voluntary form of dana. The term is found in the context in the Vedic literature. It may mean honorarium to a guru for education, training, or guidance. So once I get that part, it put to rest the one thing I had about, isn't this supposed to, I don't know, I gave the money willingly and happily, but I didn't even think that the Dharma, that I should never take knowledge for free. And at that time, I recognized that Sifu was right, as he always was, that I was going to come back again for incarnation and share my teachings. Because I came into this as a fairly elderly gentleman. So my time of sharing has been limited. I haven't reached a very big audience in YouTube, which I chose. I have a small handful of people that I work with directly, and that's enough. So I plan on living out the rest of my life doing everything I can to share my good fortunes and my experiences and my blessings. Thank you for this opportunity to share with you. And Gaan Sifu, Santan Sifu.